Paur, senior writer for RealTime Fantasy Sports, and this is
Henry Paur.
And we're here for the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show, and on today's show, we are going to give you our fantasy postseason awards. So we're going to tell you the MVP and bust from each of the main skill positions: quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end. You excited to do that today, Henry?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Before I do that, though, before we get into these regular season awards, I did want to remind you we are doing tons of postseason leagues this year here at Real Time Fantasy Sports. All different contests. Our overtime leagues have been hugely, wildly popular, Henry. A lot of fun. These are draft leagues, so you actually draft a postseason roster. Every player you can pick from, just like a regular season draft. It isn't pick two from each team, and anybody can pick players from those teams. No, this is different. This is a real draft. So go to Real Time Fantasy Sports, rtsports.com, sign up for one of these overtime leagues today. We have different price points as well. And don't forget about our fantasy postseason shootout contest, $50,000 to the winner of that contest. It's one of the best in the business. It's just an awesome contest. This is different than the overtime one, though. This is one where you can pick players from every team in the postseason. You can only pick two players from each team, though. So there's definitely a lot of strategy here. Go to rtsports.com, sign up for one of these great postseason contests today, though. A lot of fun. You don't have to stop playing fantasy just because the regular season is over. All right, Henry, now that I have that out of the way, I did want to get into these awards. Let's do it. So let's talk about our fantasy MVPs for this season and our busts. These are players that we don't think lived up to expectations. So let's get into it. Quarterback first. I'll go first. My quarterback MVP is Aaron Rodgers, Henry. Probably not a surprise to a lot of people out there. He was third overall in fantasy quarterback scoring. He had 51 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. He had 25 plus fantasy points, 13 of 16 games. So he was very consistent all season long. And his ADP was 84. So he was not picked as high as some of those elite guys. So for me, Aaron Rodgers is the MVP at quarterback. How about you, Henry?
I have Josh Allen. He was first overall in fantasy quarterback scoring, despite having Rodgers and Mahomes challenging him for that number one spot. He has 45 total touchdowns to only 10 interceptions on the season. And he threw for more than 4,500 yards on the season.
Great year for Allen. Definitely a breakout year. He was probably picked a little higher than Rodgers. It was definitely a close call for me between Rodgers and Allen. I don't know about you. I think you probably felt the same way as me. You could go either way with the MVP for quarterback. Okay, bust. So these were guys that didn't live up to expectations and didn't have quite the season that we all expected. For me, maybe a little bit of a surprise, I'm going to say Lamar Jackson. So he did have a great finish to the season, helped a lot of teams in the fantasy playoffs, but he was just 10th overall in fantasy quarterback scoring. And this was a guy that was taken first or second off the board at the quarterback position. His ADP was 19, so you had to take him in the second round. And he did not live up to that draft position because of his poor production early in the season. He had fewer than 20 fantasy points 4 of his first 10 games. He didn't even throw for 2,800 yards this year. He did top the 1,000-yard rushing mark once again, though, so that saved his fantasy season. But overall, I think Lamar Jackson was really a bust for all those teams that took him high in their drafts this year. How about you, Henry? Who's your bust at quarterback?
I have Daniel Jones. He had just 12 total touchdowns all year, despite playing all but 2 games. He also didn't even throw for 3,000 yards, and he had 16 turnovers, 10 interceptions, and 6 lost fumbles.
Yeah, not a good year for Jones. I took him in a lot of leagues. I thought he was going to have a huge year. I was really high on Jones this year. Had a great finish to last year, but things just didn't break his way, and it was a disastrous season for him, unfortunately. So maybe he can turn it around. He's still young enough to do it. We'll see. Okay, the running back position, Henry. So I'm going to go with a guy for my MVP that wasn't even drafted in most leagues. James Robinson. He is my running back MVP, finished 7th overall in fantasy running back scoring. He didn't even play the last 2 games of the year as well, and he still finished 7th overall. More than 1,400 total yards, 10 touchdowns. His consistency, this is what separated him, I think, from a lot of backs, was just off the charts this year. Double-digit fantasy points every game. And he had 5 games with 20-plus fantasy points. So James Robinson, my MVP at the running back position, a guy that wasn't drafted, ended up being top 10 overall. How about you, Henry?
I had Dalvin Cook. He was 2nd overall in fantasy running back scoring this year, and he has 8 100-yard games on the season. and he also has 17 total touchdowns and more than 1,500 rushing yards.
Great year for Cook.
Yeah.
He slipped a little bit, if you remember,
Yeah.
because of his injury concern.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't go quite as high as I think a lot of people thought
Yeah.
he would be one of the top couple picks this year, but his injury issue scared a lot of people. And
Yeah.
those owners that took him really it paid off for him.
Yeah, it paid off.
All right, the busts, running back bust. For me, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So tons of hype with Edwards-Helaire. Ended up having an ADP of 6. So he was the 6th overall pick in many leagues, but he had an uneven season, 22nd overall running back scoring, finished with 1,100 total yards and just 4 touchdowns, just 200-yard games, 10 games with fewer than 70 rushing yards. And the Chiefs even brought in Le'Veon Bell to take some of his workload, which wasn't good for his production.
Yeah.
Just didn't have the season I think most people hoped with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I still think there's hope for him, though, going forward. I still think he could be a really good player. All right, who's your bust at the running back spot, Henry?
I have Ezekiel Elliott. He had only 2 100-yard games on the season. And he also didn't hit the 1,000-yard rushing mark on the year. And was either picked by first or second in most drafts.
Yep, Elliott was definitely a bust. I agree with that assessment on him. Didn't really live up to his high draft status. He was a guy actually who was picked first in a lot of leagues.
Yeah.
If you remember, there was some debate on who to take first, and a lot of people took Elliott because of the addition of their head coach, Mike McCarthy. They thought it would be great things for him. It didn't quite work out. Okay, receiver spot, Henry. MVP. For me, it is the other end of the Josh Allen duo of Stephon Diggs.
Yeah.
Just a monster year. Huge surprise. Numbers improved with his move to Buffalo. I didn't think that was going to happen, but it did. He was 3rd overall in fantasy receiver scoring, 5 games with double-digit receptions, 7 100-yard games. He had 127 catches for 1,535 yards, double-digit fantasy points every game, so he's consistent as well. And we can't forget about his monster finish to the season in the fantasy playoffs. He won a lot of Super Bowls because of his 41.5 point performance in the Super Bowl. Just a huge game. So for me, it's Stephon Diggs. Who's your MVP, Henry?
I think it's pretty obvious. Davante Adams. He was 1st overall in fantasy scoring, and he missed 2 games because of injury. He scored touchdowns in all but only 3 games this year, and he had 18 touchdowns on the year.
Great year for Adams. Like you said, he missed 2 games too. So, man, his numbers could have been even better, which is scary. Just a great year for him. Okay, bust. Henry, who's your bust at the receiver position?
I have Michael Thomas. I don't think anyone saw this season coming from Thomas. Same with me. I drafted him. I think it was 7th or 6th overall in my draft, and I still finished 5th place in my league. He battled injury much of the year, which is his main issue, and he didn't do much when he was even on the field. He failed to score a touchdown on the entire season and didn't even top 20 fantasy points in a game this year.
Yeah, not a good year for Thomas. Definitely a big disappointment. He was my top bust as well, but I'll give you somebody else. I'll say Devontae Parker. I had high hopes for Parker this year. He was coming off strong finish to the season with Ryan Fitzpatrick as his quarterback last year, but it didn't seem like Tua and him ever got on the same page, and Tua didn't really take the chances down the field as well. So I think that hurt Parker too. I really had high hopes for Parker. I thought he could be a low-end number 1 or even a number 2 fantasy receiver this year. Just didn't happen. Again, he was another disappointment. That's kind of been his theme for his career, kind of been up and down and shown a lot of potential at times, but not lived up to the hype overall. And once again, he did it for me this year. So Devontae Parker, he's my bust at the receiver spot. Tight end. I'll give you my MVP first. It is Darren Waller. So Darren Waller was 2nd overall in tight end scoring this year. He had a great year. He was 32.2 points behind Travis Kelce. So that's saying something because Kelce had huge numbers and Waller was close to him. He would have been 6th overall in receiver scoring, Darren Waller.
Wow.
So that is amazing to me. 5 100-yard games, including 3 straight to end his year. Again, another good performer in the fantasy playoffs. And he proved last year wasn't a fluke as well. So I think Waller is here to stay, going to be a fantasy factor for the next several seasons. Who's your tight end MVP, Henry?
I have Robert Tonyan. He's an undrafted player that was 5th overall in tight end scoring by the season's end. And he has 11 touchdowns on the year and found the end zone 6 of his last 7 games on the season.
Yeah, Tonyan, a huge surprise. Much like me, I took James Robinson as an MVP because he was a player that wasn't drafted. Same thing with Tunyon.
Yeah.
This tight end position was terrible this year for the
Yeah.
most part. If you didn't have Waller or Travis Kelce or I guess even TJ Hawkinson, you had bad seasons for the most part. And so it was good when someone like Tunyon surprised and had a good year. So bust, we have a lot to pick from here.
Yeah.
I'll give you mine first. Tyler Higbee. So he had a huge finish to last year. His stock really rose coming into the season. People had high hopes for him, but just 18th overall in fantasy tight end scoring, 44 catches for 521 yards and 5 touchdowns. And he had 3 of those touchdowns in one game. So he was really bad most of the year, did not top 70 yards in a single game, had just 3 games with double-digit fantasy points. So for me, Higbee was the bust at the tight end spot. How about you?
I have Evan Ingram. He scored just 1 touchdown on the season. I had high hopes for Ingram coming in this season. If only 1 touchdown, that's really a letdown. He was 15th overall in tight end scoring, and he had just 1 game all year with more than 65 yards, which is a huge letdown.
Yep, Ingram was really impacted by his lack of scores. Just a terrible season for him because of that, fantasy-wise. He's one of the players that people had high hopes for, didn't quite come to fruition for Ingram this year. Okay, those are Henry's and I's MVPs and busts for the fantasy season. Henry, I enjoyed doing this. Did you have fun?
Yeah.
We're going to definitely do some more videos coming up as well, going over more end of the season recap type stuff, and also start looking towards next year as well. I know everybody likes it when Henry's on, so that's why I had him back. He was on a bit of a hiatus. I didn't have you on recently, but you're back now doing some videos with me, and I appreciate that. And I know you enjoy doing them as well, right?
Yeah.
All right, good deal. Okay, don't forget, sign up for those playoff leagues. There's still time before the games start on Saturday. You have a couple days, get in one of these overtime leagues or the postseason shootout as well, chance to win $50,000. So sign up today. Go to rtsports.com. All right. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports.
And Henry Paur.
Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you next time.